so the Dust Bowl was basically this time in U.S. history where the states kind of in the middle of the country were affected by these big dust clouds. And so if you look at all of these pictures, there were just these huge dust clouds that would come through states like Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas. And it was because farmers, when they were farming, the land was really dry, and they were farming. They were using tools to kind of dig up the dirt. Well, it was so dry, and there was so much land just full of dirt that when this wind would come through, it would just bring up these huge dust clouds. And we're going to talk about what they called those dust clouds. But first, we need to know who was affected by the Dust Bowl. There was Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Kansas. These 5 states were affected the most. However, there were other states, but these 5 states had the biggest effect from the Dust Bowl. These 5 states were hugely affected by the dust clouds that would come through. What is the Dust Bowl? People would refer to, these big dust clouds. They would refer to these as black blizzards. And it was just these large storms of dust that would just blow through towns. And if you look at these pictures, I mean, it's not just like a little bit of dust. It's like a huge wall of dust. It's just blowing over these towns. So these big black blizzards. They were large storms of dust. When this was during the 1930s. So 1930 to 1936 was kind of the big time of the Dust Bowl. Specifically, there's one day in 1935 where this was by far the worst day of the whole Dust Bowl. It was so dusty that people couldn't see their hand right in front of their face. They called this Black Sunday because, again, these are called black blizzards. They're huge storms of dust. And so Black Sunday was April 14th, 1935. And it was the very worst day of the whole Dust Bowl. It was so dusty, people couldn't see their hand in front of their face. So why we're talking about the Dust Bowl? Why the Dust Bowl? Well, after the Great Depression, so the Depression hit in 1929. That's when the stock market crashed. The 1930s was kind of this time of depression. Farmers were over cultivating the land, okay? They were desperate to make crops, and so they were constantly using these tools on the ground, and it was basically overworking the land. It was making the land drier. And so the land was already dry. It was getting drier, but these farmers were so desperate to make crops, so desperate for money, that they were just overworking the land, so much so that it made it super dry. So when these storms would come through, there was nothing to hold the dust down. Dust and dirt kind of stays within the grass or within trees, but there was nothing. And so these big dust storms would blow through, and it ended up looking like these pictures. I mean, it was just huge clouds of dust. But that's really it. That's the Dust Bowl. It was just huge clouds of dust called black blizzards that would blow through towns due to the fact that farmers would over cultivate the land that they were working on because they needed money, so they would make crops. They would over cultivate the land, make it drier, so they could make some money.